a bit of contest between Ridley and I over whether or not Deckard, the character I played, was a replicant or not. And
For 40 years, Harrison Ford kept his mouth shut about Sean Young. Now we know why. Their Blade Runner scenes together were supposed to be romantic. Instead, they became a battlefield. Ford hated the script changes. Young hated the direction. The tension was so thick, crew members avoided them between takes. One particular scene made Ford walk off set completely. The director called it necessary. Ford called it wrong. Young later revealed something that changed how everyone saw that film. And Ford's recent confession proves she was right. They say legends are born, but for Harrison Ford, it was more like getting dragged through fire before anyone noticed. He came into the world on July 13, 1942, in Chicago, a city pulsing with wartime energy. His mother, Dorothy Niddleman, was a radio actress who could hold a room with just her voice. His father, Christopher Ford, worked in advertising, a field that demanded charm and persuasion. But the real grit in Ford's story came from his grandparents. They had fled the pogroms of Minsk, Belarus, bringing their Jewish heritage and relentless survival instinct to America. This quiet toughness seeped through generations, setting the tone for Harrison's life before he ever set foot on a stage. In school, though, Ford wasn't the confident star you'd expect. At Maine Township High School East, he was painfully shy, nearly invisible in the hallways. Social anxiety gripped him so tight that he struggled just to speak in class. He took a drama class, not because he loved acting, but because he was desperate to change. It was therapy in disguise. The stage let him wear someone else's skin for a while. Slowly, the mask gave him courage. He later called himself a late bloomer, but those early steps toward confidence would echo through every role he ever played. Academically, he didn't stand out either. Never scored above a C. No trophies, no team jerseys, no mentions in school papers. While others were getting yearbook awards, Ford was blending into the background. No teacher looked at him and saw a future icon. But what he lacked in grades or popularity, he made up for in quiet grit. The kind of internal drive that doesn't show up on a report card, but keeps burning when no one's watching. After high school, he enrolled at Ripon College in Wisconsin, hoping maybe something would click. It did, but not in the way anyone expected. He joined a theater class on a whim and discovered a spark. For the first time, acting didn't just help him cope. It gave him purpose. He acted in campus plays, tested his limits, and found himself. But he still didn't feel like he belonged in a classroom. So before graduating, he dropped out. No backup plan, just a stubborn belief that there was something more waiting beyond textbooks and lectures. He wasn't alone in the leap. In 1964, he married his college girlfriend, Mary Marquardt. She didn't just love him, she believed in him. When they moved to Los Angeles, Mary worked as a teacher to keep them afloat, while Harrison chased auditions. Rejection was constant, but Mary held the line, cheering him on when others told him to quit. Without her, his early career might have ended before it even started. In 1966, things seemed to turn, at least on paper. Ford landed a contract with Columbia Pictures, but the reality was bleak, just $150 a week. That's barely enough to scrape by today, let alone in 1960s Los Angeles with a family. Most of his roles were so minor, his name didn't even make it into the credits. He showed up in movies like Dead Heat on a merry-go-round, but blink and you'd miss him. It wasn't acting, it was ghost work. Then came the insult that nearly broke him. After one forgettable performance, producer Jerry Tokovsky pulled him aside and said flatly, "Kid, you'll never be a movie star." He compared Ford to Tony Curtis, Polished, charming, everything Ford supposedly wasn't. The jab stung. It wasn't just cruel, it was public, and it buried any confidence Ford had been clinging to. But Ford wasn't one to bite his tongue forever. In one explosive moment, when handed yet another thankless role, rumored to be a delivery boy, he snapped. "Well, I thought that was supposed to be a delivery boy," he fired back. It got him canned on the spot. Word spread fast. Suddenly, Ford couldn't get hired at all. He was unofficially blacklisted. No auditions, no callbacks, just silence. By the late 1960s, Ford was stuck doing background parts in shows like Gunsmoke and The Virginian. No lines, no recognition, just cowboy hats and dust. Behind the scenes, he was working odd jobs, doing whatever it took to keep food on the table. Carpentry gigs here and there. The Hollywood dream was slipping away fast. Eventually, he walked away. No dramatic exit, just a quiet surrender. Acting, it seemed, wasn't meant for him. He picked up a hammer and taught himself carpentry. One job led to another. Soon, he was building recording studios, even one worth $100,000 for Brazilian star Sergio Mendes. Ironically, this hands-on work brought him back into celebrity circles, just not as an actor yet. One day, he was working on a door at the home of legendary director Francis Ford Coppola. As he sanded and drilled, casting director Fred Roos happened to be there. Roos saw something in Ford, not just his hands, but his face, his presence. He made a suggestion that would quietly change film history. "Why don't you try out for a role in George Lucas's new movie?" Ford didn't get a lead part, but he landed the role of Bob Falfa in American Graffiti, 1973, a loudmouth drag racer with a cool car and a bad attitude. It wasn't a big part, but Ford played it with such cocky energy that people noticed. The film was made for just $777,000, pocket change in Hollywood, but it earned over $200 million worldwide. Suddenly, the carpenter who walked into a house with a hammer walked out with his first real break in Hollywood. That single role didn't just get him noticed by George Lucas. It also brought him deeper into Coppola's world. After American Graffiti, Coppola started hiring Ford, not just as a builder but as an actor. In The Conversation, 1974, Ford played a cold, mysterious assistant. It wasn't a big role, but it put him in a serious film that went on to win the Grand Prix at Cannes and earned 3 Oscar nominations. 5 years later, Ford had another tiny part in Apocalypse Now, 1979, playing Colonel Lucas, the officer who hands out the mission. It was a short scene, but the name was an inside joke. George Lucas was originally supposed to direct the film, and Coppola named the character after him. Ford was now quietly threading his way into some of the most important films of the decade. Not through stardom, through trust. But when it came time to cast Star Wars, George Lucas hesitated. He didn't want to rely on the same faces. He'd already used Ford twice. He said it openly. "I didn't want to be the next Scorsese and De Niro." Lucas wanted something fresh. So instead of offering Ford the part of Han Solo, he asked him to help with the casting, just to read lines with other actors. That's when something strange happened. As Ford read scene after scene, explaining the complicated plot to dozens of nervous young hopefuls, his own delivery started to shine. It was effortless. He understood the rhythm, the charm, the sarcasm. Slowly, Lucas saw what was right in front of him. He'd already found Han Solo. Even then, the studio didn't exactly roll out the red carpet. Ford was paid just $10,000 for Star Wars, about $2,000 per week. That's it. No back-end deal, no bonuses, no cut of the box office. He wasn't offered profit sharing because nobody expected the film to be that huge, but Ford believed in the script. He took the risk, and it paid off. Star Wars hit cinemas in May 1977 and exploded. It became one of the highest-grossing films of all time, making over $775 million globally during its original run. Ford, as Han Solo, stole the show. He was cocky, funny, sharp, and fans loved him. The wisecracking smuggler became a cultural icon almost overnight. They called it a sci-fi masterpiece. But for Harrison Ford, Blade Runner felt more like a trap than a triumph. By the time he stepped on set, he was already a huge star. But none of that prepared him for what came next. The set was soaked, claustrophobic, and heavy with smoke. It wasn't acting anymore, it was endurance. Ford would later call it a long slog and desperately unhappy. And that unhappiness wasn't just about the weather. Behind the scenes, everything was a battle. And nothing stung more than the voiceovers. Ford had been promised a film that would speak through mood and visuals. But after poor test screenings, the studio panicked. They brought in writers he didn't know. They demanded he read voiceover lines that made everything too obvious. 5 or 6 versions, each one worse than the last. He hated them. So much, in fact, that he read them flat on purpose, hoping the studio would scrap the whole thing. But they didn't. They used it anyway. "I was obliged to work for these clowns," Ford said years later. And the bitterness never really left. Then there was Ridley Scott. A brilliant director, sure. But their visions collided hard. Scott believed Ford's character, Deckard, was a replicant, a machine. Ford disagreed, strongly. He thought Deckard had to be human, or the story lost all meaning. It wasn't just a debate. It was war. They argued constantly, even decades later. During the sequel's production in 2017, director Denis Villeneuve had to separate them at times. "They start to talk very loud when they do," he said. "You could laugh at it if it weren't so serious to them." The tension went beyond the creative. Blade Runner bombed when it came out. It opened with just $6 million against a $30 million budget. That's around $100 million today. Most blamed the dark story and bad timing. It was competing with E.T. But Ford had another theory. He believed people just couldn't connect emotionally. They didn't understand his character. The voiceover didn't help. The studio had even forced a cheesy, happy ending into the film. Deckard and Rachel driving into a sunny forest. It clashed with everything that came before. Ford hated it, and so did audiences. It felt fake. And that wasn't the end of the drama. The tension between Ford and his co-star, Sean Young, made things worse. He was methodical and serious. She was younger, less experienced, and described as unpredictable on set. That friction only grew during the hardest scenes. One in particular, the love scene between Deckard and Rachel, turned into something much darker. It was awkward to shoot, cold, forced. Crew members called it the hate scene. Scott changed the tone during filming, making it more aggressive. Young later said it was Scott's revenge for rejecting him off-set. Ford, already frustrated, thought the whole thing was wrong. It didn't fit how he saw Deckard. It didn't feel real. Tom Selleck was almost Indiana Jones. Back in 1980, he was Steven Spielberg and George Lucas's first pick. He wanted the role. Everything was lined up. But there was a problem. He had just finished filming the pilot for Magnum P.I., and CBS wasn't willing to let him go. Even though Spielberg and Lucas tried to adjust the shooting schedule, the network refused. Selleck later said, "I was offered the role, and I wanted it." But the contract held him back. So the role slipped away. After a month of scrambling, Harrison Ford stepped in. He wasn't their first choice. He knew it too. "Tom Selleck had the job," Ford admitted. "I became the second choice, and I'm very grateful for Tom. That one decision changed movie history. The fedora, the whip, the legend. None of it was meant to be his, but it became his forever. 3 years later, in 1983, Ford nearly broke himself filming Temple of Doom. They were shooting in Sri Lanka. In one intense scene, Indiana Jones gets attacked in his room. Ford did a somersault. That one move reactivated an old injury in his back. He had a herniated disc. The pain was unbearable. They brought a hospital bed to the set so he could rest between takes. George Lucas said he could barely stand, but he was still trying. Eventually, they had to stop everything. Ford was flown to Los Angeles. He had surgery to remove part of the damaged disc. The whole production shut down for 6 weeks. A stunt double filled in for action scenes. But 6 weeks later, Ford was back, still hurting, but finishing what he started. One of the most famous scenes in the franchise, the one where Indy shoots the swordsman, was never in the script. That scene was supposed to be a long, choreographed fight. It was going to take 3 days to film. But in Tunisia, where they were shooting, Ford got dysentery. Bad. He could barely be on set for more than 10 minutes at a time. The heat, the food, the water, it hit everyone. So Ford walked up to Spielberg and said, "Why don't we just shoot the son of a bitch?" Spielberg agreed. In one take, they filmed Indy pulling out his gun and firing. That single moment saved time, money, and Ford's health. It wasn't just funny, it became iconic. That same year in Sri Lanka, Ford did something quietly meaningful. His 12-year-old co-star, Ke Huy Quan, who played Short Round, couldn't swim. Ford found out during downtime at the hotel. Instead of brushing it off, he offered to teach him. In the hotel pool, between scenes, Indiana Jones became a swim coach. Quan later said, "To this day, I thank him for that." It wasn't in the script, but it became one of his most lasting gifts. Decades later, they met again at the Oscars. Quan was emotional. Ford smiled. A bond made in the jungle had lasted a lifetime. Ford never stopped pushing himself. In 2021, while filming Dial of Destiny, he was 78. He still wanted to do his own stunts. During a rehearsal, he was showing Mads Mikkelsen how to throw a punch. Ford held his hat over Mikkelson's face and pulled back to swing. Suddenly, someone walked too close. Ford adjusted mid-motion and tore a muscle clean off his shoulder, the subscapularis. It was serious. Production shut down for 2 weeks. Then he needed 6 more weeks to recover. Ford joked later, "I'm also known for shutting movies down because I get hurt. But hey, shit happens." Even in his late 70s, he still gave everything. But Ford's life off-screen was messier. In 1977, during the filming of Star Wars, he started a secret affair with 19-year-old Carrie Fisher. He was 33 and married. She was barely out of her teens. The affair lasted 3 months. Fisher kept it quiet for nearly 40 years. When she finally wrote about it in her memoir, she called it a 3-month one-night stand. No one on set knew, not even Mark Hamill. Fisher was obsessed. Ford stayed silent. He never denied it, but he never talked about it either. The affair started at George Lucas's birthday party. Fisher got drunk, she rarely drank, and the male crew played a strange joke by pretending to kidnap her. Ford stepped in, fought them off, and put her in a studio car. That night, they went to dinner, then to a hotel. That's how it began. She later said, "He saved me. Then he took me." It wasn't a fairy tale. It was complicated, emotional, and never talked about again, until decades later. At the time, Ford was married to Mary Marquardt. They had 2 sons. She had stood by him during his struggling years. But the marriage was cracking. Rumors swirled, that she caught him with another woman, though never confirmed. The affair with Fisher was just one part of a pattern. In 1979, Ford and Marquardt divorced after 15 years of marriage. They stayed friends. He even helped her when she was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. But the damage had been done. When Fisher finally published her book in 2016, Ford was furious. She hadn't warned him. He felt ambushed. He threatened legal action, but he never went public. She later said she regretted writing about it. Her brother claimed she wished she'd kept the secret. They had appeared together in The Force Awakens the year before. Smiling for cameras, hiding old wounds, Ford's personal life kept making headlines. In 1983, he married Melissa Matheson, the screenwriter behind E.T. They had met on the set of Apocalypse Now years earlier. She was talented, respected, and kind. They had 2 children, Malcolm in 1987, Georgia in 1990. For a while, it looked like stability, but by 2000, they were no longer living together. Ford was seen partying, photographed with other women. The tabloids had a field day. It wasn't new. He had always been a magnet for rumors. This time, the marriage couldn't survive it. The divorce took 3 years. There was no prenup. Ford was earning $20 million a film. Matheson didn't make nearly as much. The final settlement was massive. Reports say she got at least $85 million, possibly as high as $118 million. She also received a share of future earnings from movies made during their marriage. The process was long and painful, but in public, they kept things civil. Privately, it was a different story. Throughout both marriages, the same issues kept showing up: distance, partying, women. Ford's on-screen charm didn't match his private struggles. His affairs drove wedges into the lives of the women he once promised forever. Fisher once said she felt like she was number 1 to him, but knew she probably wasn't. Marquardt stood by him. Matheson tried to hold the family together, but the fame, the temptations, and the silence between them all took their toll. Harrison Ford is one of the most famous action stars in the world, but behind that tough guy image is a long history of real pain, broken bones, near-death crashes, and enough injuries to sideline an entire football team. What makes it more surprising is that most of those wounds were self-inflicted, not by recklessness, but by choice. Ford has always insisted on doing his own stunts, no matter how dangerous, and over the years, that decision has come at a steep cost. It started early in his career. During Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom in 1984, Ford rode elephants so long that he ended up with a herniated disc. He had to fly back to the U.S. for surgery, while a stunt double filled in. And that wasn't a one-off. In Raiders of the Lost Ark, he tore his ACL and bruised his ribs when he was dragged behind a truck. In The Fugitive, he limped through most of the movie because of real ligament damage. Even in his 70s, he wasn't slowing down. While shooting Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny in 2023, he hurt his shoulder rehearsing a fight scene and had to wear a sling as production was rearranged around him. Ford doesn't complain. He shrugs it off. He once joked, "It's not the years, honey, it's the mileage." But his body tells a different story. From snowboards to horses to hydraulic doors, everything seems to have taken a shot at him at some point. And in 2014, one of those hits nearly killed him. While filming Star Wars: The Force Awakens, Ford was inside the Millennium Falcon set when a hydraulic door, designed to shut quickly, suddenly slammed down. It crushed him. His leg was shattered. The bones in his left leg snapped, his ankle was dislocated, and his hand was gashed open. He had to be airlifted to the hospital. The set shut down for 8 weeks. Investigators later called the door a blunt guillotine, and said that if it had struck his head or torso, it might have killed him. A UK court found the production company responsible and fined them for safety failures. The entire door mechanism was scrapped and replaced with CGI. One small misstep, 1 second of bad timing, and Hollywood nearly lost one of its biggest stars. And yet, Ford came back. He still cracked jokes. On the next Indiana Jones set, someone tried to help him off a horse. He waved them off, grumbling, "Leave me the fuck alone, I'm an old man." But that's always been Ford's way. Tough, stubborn, and fiercely independent. He's not just reckless on film sets. Ford has also had a dramatic second career as a pilot. In 1999, he crash-landed a helicopter during training in California. In 2015, flying a World War II-era plane over Los Angeles, he lost engine power and crash-landed on a golf course. His pelvis and ankle were broken, but even then, he stayed calm, guided the plane away from homes, and made a controlled emergency landing. That wasn't the only time he made headlines in the air. In 2017, he landed on the wrong taxiway at John Wayne Airport, flying directly over a full passenger jet. In 2020, he crossed an active runway at Hawthorne Airport while another plane was coming in. Both times, the FAA investigated. Ford admitted fault, apologized, and continued flying. But sometimes, his flying saved lives. In 2000, a hiker was in trouble on Table Mountain in Idaho. She was weak, dehydrated, and stranded. Ford jumped in his Bell 407 helicopter, flew up the mountain, and personally rescued her. She didn't even realize it was him until after she was in the air, safe. Ford's story is full of these contrasts. Reckless, but heroic. Broken, but unshakable. He crashes planes, but saves lives. He gets crushed by doors, but still fights bad guys on screen. At 82, he's still acting, still doing stunts, and still getting injured. His personal life has had its own turbulence. In the late 1970s, while married, he had an affair with Carrie Fisher during Star Wars. It came out decades later in Fisher's memoir. Ford never denied it, though he stayed mostly silent. He divorced his second wife, screenwriter Melissa Matheson, in 2004 after a long and expensive legal battle. No prenup meant the settlement took years to finalize. But things changed when he met actress Callista Flockhart in 2002 at the Golden Globes. He accidentally spilled wine on her dress. They started dating soon after, and despite a 22-year age gap, the relationship lasted. Ford proposed on Valentine's Day in 2009, and they married a year later in Santa Fe. He was 68. She had adopted a son, Liam, before they met, and Ford embraced fatherhood again without hesitation. They've been private, but steady ever since. Still, some things never softened. Ford has always hated talking about Star Wars. In interviews, he rolls his eyes, shrugs off questions, or makes sarcastic jokes. Once, on Jimmy Fallon's show, he used a Han Solo action figure to reenact Han's death, then flung it across the room. For years, Ford wanted the character to die. He believed Han Solo's death would make the story better. George Lucas disagreed. But in The Force Awakens, Ford finally got his wish. Han was killed by his own son, Kylo Ren. It shocked fans, but for Ford, it was a full-circle moment. He spent much of his life trying to bury his wild past. Womanizing, drinking, infidelity, those stories followed him for decades. But with age came stability. These days, he's known less for scandal and more for his grit. Still, he hasn't gone soft. Most of his teeth are fake, thanks to an on-set accident. He once tripped over a prop gun and smashed his mouth. In 1968, he crashed a car trying to put on a seatbelt. And he's still doing action scenes, still getting hurt, still making movies,